Well, I'm glad that you could join us. I'm glad that you came back and are able to stay. As I mentioned last week, this is about not being religious. It's about the discovery of faith and how that impacts your life. I'm not talking about going to church. I'm not talking about all the things that have become part of the ritual Christian life, but I'm talking about the relationship that you can have with God and what that means for your life, for you to find purpose and an ability to live your most authentic self. The title of this is Beside Still Waters. And as the opening frames show you, it's beside still waters, he restores my soul. This comes from Psalm 23, and there it says in Psalm 23, about the second verse down into the psalm, it says, he leads me beside the still waters, and he restores my soul. The world around us, especially in this pandemic time and in our isolation, we struggle with restoration of who we are. Who am I in this? And what does my life mean now in all of this? And can God lead me? Sometimes people feel that God can't lead them because they've disqualified themselves. Sometimes people feel that God doesn't want to lead them because they're not perfect. Can God lead me in the condition that I am today? And you remember, as we ended last Sunday's little conversation, there was that little prayer, Lord, can you lead me today? Can you come into my heart? I can't promise tomorrow, Lord. Let's just be honest. Let's be honest with him. This is not a foxhole conversion where the war is around us and we say, Lord, get me out of this problem and I'll serve you the rest of my life. We're only talking today. We're talking like an alcoholic. Today, Lord, I'm not going to take a drink. Today, Lord, I want to serve you. So help me through just even today. He leads me beside the still waters. I changed a little bit of the focus of what I want to talk about, and I did want to talk about some of the people of the Bible who were led along the paths of righteousness. Now, in the picture behind me, this is a picture from a place in Cuba that I know, and there's a small river, and on the left-hand side there is a person walking to work, a very normal, everyday kind of person. And why this is so important to me is because this signifies us. We are important to God. You don't have to be born with a silver spoon in your mouth to be important in the kingdom of God. God looks for us all. And we began last week with the Gospel of John. And in the Gospel of John, in chapter 1, we read, and I want to read it for you again. It says, in him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shone in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. So the writer of John here is saying that first of all, God sent Jesus, who was God's son, into the world, and he sent him with life, light, and that life and light was meant to attract people to how they were created to live in God. But it says that the light shines in the darkness, but first of all, the darkness did not understand it. It didn't comprehend it. That the darkness was going its own way without the real comprehension of the meaning of life or what that means for them. And we tend to live in darkness. We don't know what tomorrow holds. There's darkness in our minds in terms of future events. We don't know how long this pandemic will last. There's darkness in our lives in terms of all that's happening around us and all that could be. He says much the same thing as this that he does in verse 4. He says it again in verse 9. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. So he says this same kind of thing 3 times. We're at the second one. And here he says, the true light that gives light to every man or every person. So the true light that gives light to you was coming into the world. The true light that could show you the way for your journey in life of who you are created to be, meant to be, where you find your greatest joy, where you find your greatest purpose, where life makes its greatest sense, that light was coming into the world. But it goes on and it says that though the world was made by him, though God's fingerprints were all over everything, though God's fingerprints are all over your life, in how he's protected you, and maybe you didn't realize it, though God's fingerprints are all over your relationships and kept you safe or guided you through difficult times of loss and loneliness, even though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. Third time he says, he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So you notice the progression that's happening here. First of all, it was in verse 4, in him was life, that life was light. The light shines in the darkness didn't understand it. That's the bigger circle of our lives. Maybe that's the country or the province that you live in. Maybe that's the state that surrounds you. And then he says that true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. And so he narrows it down a little bit here, the writer does. That true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. And he was in the world, and he made the world. His fingerprints are everywhere. But the world did not recognize him. Then he brings it down a little closer, right into who you are, who I am. He came to that which was his own. Now I'm going to suggest to you here, and specifically here, he came to his own, but his own did not receive him. That's an awkward kind of a verse there. It kind of reminds me of Revelation chapter 3, and he's talking there to the churches, and Jesus says about verse 18 of chapter 3, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And if anyone hear my voice and open the door, he says, I will come in and I will have fellowship with him, and we'll share a meal together, and we'll become friends, we'll talk. But the picture in that story of Revelation chapter 3, verse 18, is that Jesus is on the outside of the door. Now, what's so startling about this is that he is talking to the church. This is a church of Laodicea. And here he's saying, okay, I'm outside the gathering. I'm outside the church. The church has become religious, and the church says we are wealthy, we're increased with goods, we have need of nothing. But Jesus says, hold on a minute. You don't understand that you're poor, you're naked, you're miserable, and you're blind. See, that kind of goes along with what we're talking here. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. But there's an encouraging passage. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave to them the right, the privilege, the power to become children of God. And he goes on to explain what that means to be a child of God. But he says, to all those who believed on his name. So it begs the question, how do you believe on the name of Jesus? You know, some of you drive Fords, some of you drive Chevs, and some of you drive Hondas or Toyotas or whatever your favorite car is. But somehow or another, you have come to believe that one vehicle is better than another. If you haven't done that, how did you make your decision to buy that car? Now, you could have a car, and it could sit out in the driveway, and you would maybe never go and turn the key in it because you don't believe it will work. Maybe the battery's missing, or maybe it's out of fuel, or maybe the tires are flat, or maybe there's something wrong with the engine. But somehow or another, listen to this, you have experience with that particular vehicle. And you see, our faith, the discovery of faith, faith is a part of believing, believing is a part of faith. And if we are to discover faith, we have to begin with some kind of an experience of Christ, some kind of an experience of faith, some kind of an experience when we have joined the journey of people who have come to know God through experiences with Him. Now, there's a way to do this. And to do this is much like I mentioned last week, where you invite Jesus into your life. And I'm suggesting to you, as I've already said, not to say, Lord, get me out of this mess and I'll follow you all the rest of my life, because you don't know that. And so often people lie to God. Say, Lord, I'm in a real pickle here. I got trouble. I don't know. I'm feeling lost. I'm feeling lonely. I'm feeling alone. Is there some way that you could help me today? I'm not in a position, honestly, Lord, to be honest enough to say I'll give you the rest of my life. If you can, well, that's great. But just be honest with Him and begin the journey of faith for today. And see how peace comes into your life. See how purpose begins to build around you. See how even your moods begin to improve. Because Jesus said, to as many as received Him, gave He the right, gave He the privilege and the power to become children of God. This is something that's remarkable. He leads us beside the still waters so He can restore our souls. How are you doing in the pandemic? How are you doing in the crisis? How are you doing in the isolation? How are you doing in the uncertainty? Maybe you need your soul restored today. Well, come join us. Nothing in your life to this point in time can disqualify you from being led by God Himself to the still waters where your soul can be restored and you can find meaning. Isn't that a great promise? That's the promise that you have today. Come on, join us on the journey. Say this simple prayer, Lord, come into my life, whatever that means. In this moment, for today, can't promise tomorrow, but for today, Lord, I want to follow you. I want to be led by you. I want to see, Lord, I want to experience. I want to know, are you real or are you not? Let's journey along. It's open to you. Nothing you have done to this point in time will disqualify you from being a follower or being led by Jesus Christ. Join us as we continue along the journey of what this looks like. Let's keep going. God bless you.